Imagine you've just witnessed something impossible. Maybe it was a strange craft hovering silently above a field. Maybe it was a glowing object that moved in ways no aircraft should. Maybe it was something even stranger. You tell a few friends, you report what you saw, you begin searching for answers. And then someone knocks on your door. He's dressed in a black suit, his expressions are emotionless, his questions feel rehearsed. And somehow, despite looking human, something about him feels profoundly wrong. This is the mystery of the men in black. For decades, witnesses to unusual aerial phenomena have reported visits from strange individuals who appear shortly after a sighting. These visitors often arrive unannounced, asking unsettling questions, and sometimes issuing warnings, subtle or otherwise, about speaking publicly. Unlike the slick secret agents portrayed in Hollywood films, the original Men in Black stories were often far stranger. Witnesses described pale skin, awkward speech, unusual facial features, and behavior that seemed almost artificial. Some appeared unfamiliar with everyday objects. Others spoke in strange patterns, as if they had learned human interaction from a manual but never actually practiced it. The phenomenon occupies a peculiar place in UFO history because it exists somewhere between folklore, psychological mystery, intelligence agency conspiracy theories, and reports that seem genuinely difficult to explain. And unlike many paranormal stories, Men in Black encounters are often reported not during the event itself, but afterward, when witnesses begin discussing what they experienced. This raises an intriguing question. If these stories are more than rumor and exaggeration, who or what are these visitors supposed to be? Are they government agents attempting to suppress information? Are they hoaxers exploiting frightened witnesses? Are they manifestations of the human mind? Or could they represent something even stranger? Before we examine what the Law of One has to say, we first need to understand how the Men in Black became one of the most enduring legends in modern paranormal history. Because long before Hollywood turned them into charismatic secret agents armed with memory erasing gadgets, people were reporting encounters with figures who seemed less like government operatives and more like visitors trying very hard to imitate human beings. And according to some witnesses, they weren't doing a very convincing job. Nothing boosts confidence quite like being interrogated by someone who appears to have learned human behavior 5 minutes earlier. So, where did these stories begin? And why have they persisted for nearly a century? To answer that, we have to go back to some of the earliest and most influential accounts ever recorded. The modern Men in Black phenomena can largely be traced back to a single man. His name was Albert Bender. In the early 1950s, Bender was not a government investigator, scientist, or military officer. He was simply a UFO enthusiast living in Connecticut who had become deeply interested in reports of flying saucers. In 1952, he founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, one of the earliest civilian UFO research organizations in the United States. The government attracted thousands of members and became one of the most active UFO organizations of its time. Then something strange happened. Without warning, Bender abruptly shut the organization down. Even more mysterious, he hinted that he had discovered a terrifying secret. According to later accounts, Bender claimed he had been visited by three men dressed in black suits. These individuals allegedly appeared in a room that had been locked, questioned him, and communicated information that left him deeply shaken. Bender would later describe overwhelming feelings of dread during the encounter. Whether the event happened exactly as reported remains impossible to verify, but the story spread rapidly throughout the growing UFO community and became one of the foundational accounts of Men in Black lore. The story might have faded into obscurity if not for another figure, a journalist and UFO researcher named Gray Barker. Barker took Bender's account and popularized it in his 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. The book introduced countless readers to the idea that mysterious individuals were actively monitoring and intimidating people involved in UFO research. From that point forward, reports began appearing from all over the United States. Witnesses described eerily similar encounters, men arriving unexpectedly, black suits, black automobiles, emotionless expressions, an unsettling sense that something wasn't quite right. Some reports became particularly bizarre. Witnesses claimed the visitors seemed confused by ordinary objects. Others reported strange speech patterns as though English was being translated in real time. A few described skin that appeared unnaturally pale or wax like. Others claimed the figures displayed little understanding of normal social interaction. One witness reported a visitor who appeared fascinated by a ballpoint pen and seemed uncertain how to use it. Another described a man who repeatedly asked questions than any ordinary person should already know. Stories like these gradually shifted the Men in Black away from the image of secret government agents and towards something far stranger. Many witnesses didn't merely say the visitors were intimidating, they said the visitors seemed artificial, almost human, but not quite. Think less seasoned intelligent officer and more alien intern on his first day pretending to be a person. As the decades passed, the phenomenon expanded beyond UFO sightings. Men in Black reports began appearing alongside encounters involving cryptids, paranormal events, and other unexplained experiences. One of the most famous examples emerged during the events surrounding the Mothman sightings in West Virginia during the 1960s. Witnesses reported encounters with peculiar dark suit individuals who asked unusual questions, appeared unexpectedly, and displayed behavior that many described as deeply unsettling. Researcher John Keel documented numerous reports of mysterious visitors connected to paranormal events. While some claims remain controversial, they helped cement the Men in Black as a recurring feature of paranormal folklore. A pattern began to emerge. The visitors rarely harmed anyone. They rarely displayed overt violence. Instead, they often seemed focused on one objective: creating fear. Witnesses frequently describe leaving these encounters with a lingering sense of anxiety and unease that lasted long after the visitors had departed. Whether these stories represent psychological phenomena, urban legends, government activity, or something genuinely anomalous remains an open question. But by the late 20th century, the Men in Black had become one of the most recognizable mysteries in UFO culture. And beneath all of the strange details, one question remained unanswered. If these entities truly exist, why would they want people to remain silent? Why appear at all? And perhaps most importantly, what are they actually trying to accomplish? Surprisingly, this is precisely the question that was eventually asked in a Law of One material. And the answer Ra provides is unlike any conventional explanation you've probably heard before. Before we examine what the Law of One says about the Men in Black, it's important to acknowledge a simple reality. The evidence for these encounters is far from conclusive. Unlike physical artifacts that can be examined in a laboratory, most Men in Black reports rely almost entirely on eyewitness testimony. And eyewitness testimony, while valuable, has limitations. Human memory is imperfect. People unintentionally exaggerate details. Stories evolve as they are retold. And once a compelling narrative enters popular culture, new reports can sometimes be influenced by previous accounts. This creates a challenge. If someone genuinely experiences something unusual, how do we distinguish that experience from folklore, misunderstanding, or suggestion? Many researchers have proposed entirely conventional explanations for the Men in Black phenomenon. Some suggest that government agents may have occasionally interviewed witnesses during periods of heightened concern about national security, particularly during the Cold War. Others believe the stories developed through a combination of rumor, media amplification, and the natural tendency for legends to grow over time. Psychologists have pointed to another possibility. Human beings often struggle with uncertainty. When confronted with an event that appears impossible, the mind naturally seeks explanations. In some cases, the mysterious visitor who appears afterward may become part of the story itself, a symbolic representation of fear, authority, or the unknown. This wouldn't necessarily mean the witness was dishonest, only that the human mind can be remarkably creative when trying to organize extraordinary experiences. There is also an undeniable influence of popular culture. Books, documentaries, television programs, and eventually Hollywood films transformed the Men in Black into cultural icons. Once an image becomes deeply embedded in society, reports often begin to resemble the image people already recognize. In other words, the legend can sometimes feed itself, which is admittedly much easier than actually locating a fleet of mysterious black sedans roaming the countryside. Yet, even after considering all these possibilities, some researchers remain unconvinced that conventional explanations tell the entire story. One reason is the consistency of certain reports. Long before the Men in Black became a household name, witnesses were describing remarkably similar characteristics. The black clothing, the unusual behavior, the strange emotional atmosphere, the feeling that the visitor was somehow pretending to be human rather than naturally being human. None of this proves the phenomenon is real, but it does explain why the mystery continues to attract attention decades later. And this brings us to a crucial distinction. The Law of One does not attempt to prove that every Men in Black story is genuine, nor does Raw claim that every witness encountered the same type of entity. Instead, Raw addresses a much narrower question. If some of these encounters involve a genuine non human influence, what might those entities actually be? The answer emerges during session 12 when Don Elkins asks about reports of the mysterious black clad visitors associated with UFO sightings. Ra's response is brief, but the implications are enormous. Ra states, the men in black are a thought form type of entity which have some beingness to their makeup. That statement alone raises more questions than it answers. What exactly is a thought form? How can a thought become something that appears physically present? And what does Ra mean when describing these entities as having some beingness? The discussion becomes even stranger when Ra goes on to describe them as constructs created for a specific purpose. Not fully biological, not entirely imaginary, and not quite what most people would consider a living being. To understand what Ra is describing, we first need to explore two of the most unusual concepts found anywhere in the Law of One: thought forms and constructs. Because, according to Ra, understanding that distinction is the key to understanding the Men in Black phenomenon itself. At this point, the Law of One takes the Men in Black discussion in a direction that is very different from government conspiracies, secret agencies, or extraterrestrials traveling around in black sedans. Instead, Ra introduces a concept rooted in consciousness itself. When Dawn asks about the Men in Black, Ra responds, the Men in Black are a thought form type of entity which have some beingness to their makeup. It's a fascinating answer because Ra does not describe these entities as ordinary physical beings, nor does Ra describe them as purely imaginary. Instead, they seem to occupy a strange middle ground. To understand what Ra means, we first need to examine the concept of a thought form. Within many spiritual traditions, consciousness is not viewed merely as something that observes reality. Consciousness is viewed as something that helps create reality. The idea appears in various forms throughout history. Tibetan traditions speak of tulpas. Mystic traditions describe apparitions. Many religious systems contain accounts of visions or entities that seem to emerge through focused attention and consciousness. The details vary from culture to culture, but the underlying idea remains surprisingly similar. Thought can sometimes take form. Now, before anyone starts trying to manifest a fleet of paranormal secret agents, it's important to recognize that these traditions are often symbolic, philosophical, or deeply spiritual in nature. And if your meditation session accidentally creates three mysterious men in suits, you may wish to reconsider your visualization techniques. Ra's description appears to fit within the broader framework. A thought form, in the simplest sense, can be understood as consciousness organized into a perceivable pattern. We've discussed different examples of thought forms in previous episodes, including our Bigfoot and cattle mutilation videos. Thought forms are not necessarily biological, not necessarily permanent, but real enough to be experienced, real enough to interact, real enough to create an effect. Ra even provides a detail that would sound right at home in many classic Men in Black accounts. In session 12.22, Ra explains that these entities do not possess what he calls true third density vibrational characteristics. Because of this, they are reportedly capable of materializing and dematerializing when necessary. Within the Law of One framework, this ability is not presented as advanced technology, but as a consequence of their underlying nature. If these entities are fundamentally thought form constructs rather than ordinary biological beings, their appearance in physical reality would be temporary and conditional rather than permanent. But Ra doesn't stop there, because the Men in Black are not described merely as thought forms, they are also described as constructs. And this distinction is important. A thought form is the substance, a construct is the structure. Imagine a sculptor working with clay. The clay itself would be analogous to the thought form, the raw material. The sculpture created from that clay would be analogous to the construct, the organized expression given shape and purpose. In other words, according to Ra, these entities are not simply random manifestations. They appear to be deliberately designed, programmed in a sense, created to perform a particular function. This introduces another important concept: the Orion group. For viewers unfamiliar with the Law of One, Ra describes the Orion group as a collection of negatively polarized entities who seek influence through control, manipulation, and the restriction of free will. Where the Confederation attempts to aid spiritual growth through offering information and preserving choice, the Orion group attempts to increase separation through fear, domination, and confusion. In this framework, the Men in Black are not independent actors. They are tools, they are constructs, purpose built manifestations designed to achieve a specific objective. And what is that objective? According to Ra, intimidation, suppression, discouragement, not necessarily through violence, but through fear. This point is subtle but important. Many classic Men in Black reports involve threats that are strangely vague. The visitors often don't attack. They don't arrest people, they don't physically force compliance. Instead, they create an atmosphere, a feeling, an overwhelming sense that continuing one's investigation would be unwise. Looking back at the historical reports, this is one of the most curious aspects of the phenomenon. Witnesses frequently describe feeling terrified, yet struggle to explain exactly why. The fear often seemed disproportionate to what was actually said. From the Law of One perspective, this makes sense. If the goal is to discourage seeking and create doubt, fear itself becomes the mechanism. The emotional reaction is the tool. The construct merely delivers it. And this may also explain one of the strangest recurring details found throughout the Men in Black lore: their apparent lack of humanity. The awkward conversations, the unusual mannerisms, the sense that something is slightly off. If these entities are not biological beings who grew up within human society, but rather temporary constructs generated for a specific purpose, it would make sense that their imitation of human behavior might occasionally be imperfect, almost convincing, but not entirely. Close enough to pass at a glance, strange enough to be remembered forever. Like someone trying to blend into a party after reading a book titled Human Interaction for Beginners. Of course, this remains entirely within the framework of the Law of One. There is no scientific evidence demonstrating the existence of thought form constructs, there's no laboratory that has captured an Orion created entity for analysis, and no experiment has conclusively demonstrated that consciousness can generate autonomous beings. But what makes Ra's explanation so intriguing is not merely the claim itself, it's how neatly it attempts to explain the odd characteristics reported by witnesses for decades. Not fully human, not fully imaginary, not entirely alive in the conventional sense. Something in between. Something that appears to have just enough beingness to fulfill its purpose. And if Ra is correct, that purpose has very little to do with gathering information. Instead, it has everything to do with influencing the choices people make when confronted with the unknown. At first glance, the Law of One explanation for the Men in Black seems to be about mysterious entities, strange visitors, thought form constructs, Orion influence. But if we step back for a moment, something interesting emerges. Ross spends remarkably little time discussing the entities themselves. Instead, the larger Law of One material consistently focuses on something else: how people respond to fear. This is an important distinction. In many conspiracy theories, power comes from information: the secret document, the hidden technology, the classified report. But in the Law of One, power often comes from consciousness, from perception, from choice, from reaction. This means that the effectiveness of negative influence is not determined solely by its existence. It is determined by how we respond to it. Throughout the Law of One, Ra repeatedly emphasizes the importance of free will. Even negatively polarized entities cannot simply override a person's spiritual journey at will. They can influence, they can tempt, they can deceive, they can create confusion. But ultimately, the choice remains with the individual. This perspective creates a fascinating way of viewing the Men in Black phenomenon. If Ra is correct, then the purpose of these constructs is not necessarily to stop someone physically. The purpose is to create enough uncertainty, anxiety, and intimidation that the person chooses to stop themselves. Fear becomes the mechanism, the individual becomes the participant, and the decision becomes self generated. In other words, the most effective prison is often the one we build ourselves, which is both profound and slightly irritating. This idea extends far beyond UFO research. Consider how often fear influences human behavior: fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of ridicule, fear of standing apart from the crowd, fear of being wrong, fear of being right. Many of the most significant decisions people make are influenced by concerns that exist largely in the mind. The feared outcome may never actually occur, yet the anticipation alone is often enough to alter behavior. This is one reason the Men in Black stories remain compelling even for people who doubt their literal reality. Whether or not mysterious entities in black suits have ever appeared on someone's doorstep, almost everyone has experienced a force that discourages curiosity. A voice that says, "Don't ask that question. Don't explore that possibility. Don't challenge what you've been told. Stay where it's comfortable." The Law of One suggests that spiritual growth often begins at precisely the point where those fears are confronted. Not recklessly, not blindly, but consciously. Ra frequently describes evolution of consciousness as a process of seeking, seeking truth, seeking understanding, seeking self knowledge, and every seeker eventually encounters uncertainty. The unknown is part of the journey. The question is how one responds to it. This is why the Men in Black discussion ultimately becomes less about paranormal visitors and more about a universal human experience. The phenomenon, whether literal or symbolic, represents an encounter with fear, and fear presents a choice: retreat or continue seeking. Raw's interpretation suggests that negative influences gain strength when fear causes contraction of awareness. Positive growth occurs when fear is acknowledged, but does not become the decision maker. That doesn't mean every mystery must be pursued, nor does it mean every extraordinary claim should be accepted. Discernment remains essential. Healthy skepticism remains essential. Critical thinking remains essential. The goal is not to believe everything. The goal is to avoid allowing fear to determine what may be explored. And perhaps that's why the Men in Black continue to fascinate people decades after the first stories appeared. Because beneath the suits, beneath the legends, and beneath the strange reports lies a question that every person eventually faces. Will fear decide the limits of your curiosity? Or will curiosity continue despite the fear? According to the Law of One, that choice may matter far more than the entities themselves. The Men in Black occupy a strange place in modern mythology. Unlike many paranormal mysteries, they are rarely the main event. They arrive after the sighting, after the encounter, after the mystery has already begun. For decades, witnesses have described unsettling visitors dressed in black, asking unusual questions and leaving behind a lingering sense of unease. Some researchers view these stories as folklore, others see them as psychological phenomena. Still others believe they point towards something genuinely unexplained. As with so many subjects explored on this channel, certainty remains elusive. And perhaps that's exactly where the most interesting questions begin. The Law of One offers an interpretation that is both unusual and surprisingly philosophical. Rather than describing the Men in Black as government agents or extraterrestrial travelers, Ra characterizes them as thought form constructs associated with the Orion group. Entities designed not primarily to harm, but to influence. Not primarily to attack, but to discourage. Not primarily to control through force, but to control through fear. Whether one accepts this explanation is ultimately a personal decision. The Law of One is not asking for belief, it is offering a framework through which these reports may be viewed. And as always, viewers should approach such claims with both an open mind and healthy discernment. But perhaps the most enduring lesson has very little to do with mysterious visitors in dark suits. Because even if every Men in Black story were someday explained through conventional means, the underlying principle would remain. Fear has always been one of the most effective ways to limit exploration. Fear can prevent questions from being asked. It can prevent ideas from being examined. It can prevent growth before growth has even begun. The Law of One repeatedly suggests that spiritual evolution is not a journey towards certainty, it is a journey towards deeper seeking, towards greater understanding, towards a willingness to continue exploring despite the absence of definitive answers. And in that sense, the Men in Black become more than a paranormal mystery, they become a symbol of the forces, internal or external, that attempt to convince us to stop searching, to stop questioning, to stop growing. And each of us encounters those forces in one form or another, not necessarily as mysterious figures arriving at the front door, though admittedly that would make the lesson much easier to recognize. More often, they appear as doubt, anxiety, embarrassment, social pressure, the quiet voice that says, don't look any further. Yet history's greatest discoveries, scientific, philosophical, and spiritual, have often come from people who continued asking questions when it would have been easier not to. People willing to explore the unknown despite uncertainty. People willing to seek. Perhaps that is the real takeaway from this strange corner of the Law of One. Not whether the Men in Black exist, not whether thought form constructs walk among us, not even whether Orion entities are real, but whether fear should determine the boundaries of our curiosity. Because if there is one message that echoes throughout the Law of One, it is that growth begins with seeking, and seeking begins with a question. So the next time you encounter a mystery, whether in the skies above, the world around you, or within your own consciousness, consider this: the most important choice may not be what you find, it may be whether you continue looking. And perhaps that's a question no man in black can answer for you. Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you all love, light, peace, and joy. Take care.